Everybody got a sheet of paper because this is, interactive. We're going to be playing here later on. All right, so everyone, thank you for joining me for accessibility and what I learned on the way to get Thai food. Before I get started, I'm going to tell you a quick story. It was a beautiful spring day in April 2016. I was on my way to Lulu's Thai food with my partner, and we were going to, we'd had a long day and we were very hungry. And I was driving, and in an instant that I realized that I couldn't see out of my entire eye. And later that night, I would learn that I'd experienced a retinal detachment, but what I didn't know is that was only the beginning. So appointments were made and the surgeries were scheduled, and after my first surgery, my vision continued to degrade because I'm like 1% of the population that actually creates too much scar tissue. And this, of course, pretty much sealed my fate because the nature of the surgery itself is to create a little bit of scar tissue to hold the retina back into place. And with me, that little bit of scar tissue just continued to grow and grow and grow until I detached for a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time, and yes, a final fifth retinal detachment. Now, this wasn't my last surgery. I actually had one more surgery. I'm going to spare you all the details. It's quite boring, but after my sixth surgery, I am a medical success. It's true, I am a medical success. My retina is attached. I'm also considered legally blind in my left eye, so it just goes to show you should be very specific in what you ask for. So this is an approximation of my vision in my left eye today. My name is Scott Wilmarth, and I'm an accessibility strategist on the user experience team, of course, in Kansas City. And while I don't require much more than a larger font size or a good contrast ratio, there was a period during that, after the surgeries, about a week and a half to 2 weeks after each one of those surgeries, where it was really, really hard to watch TV, to read, to use any of my devices. And in fact, during that time, I used all of my devices set with the largest font size, and I had it zoomed in, and it was really hard, right? So it's a good thing that Siri's good at music because the rest of technology was not my friend. But actually, I think I'm really lucky, right? I love what I do. I work at Cerner. I'm on the user experience team. I'm in a perfect place to make a direct impact on the accessibility of our solutions. So accessibility, as you can imagine, is actually more than just a checkbox to me, right? It's actually something that's quite personal. And while I've always been an advocate for accessibility, my recent experience has helped me understand accessibility on a whole new level. Now, while we're all working really, really hard to build some really great solutions, we're just not really doing enough to make sure that they're accessible by everyone. We just lack the knowledge and understanding of how to do that, right? So I know we don't mean to, but it's just something we have to understand. So today, that's what I'm going to talk to you about. I'm going to talk to you about the what, the why, the who, and the how of accessibility. So we'll talk about what it means to be accessible and why we need to be accessible. We'll talk about who needs accessibility. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about how you and your teams can start meeting accessibility needs today. So you may think that accessibility is some crazy far-off planet that you just don't understand, and that may be true, but it doesn't have to be. But first, you have to change your thinking a little bit, because accessibility is not about designing for disabilities. Instead, accessibility is about ensuring that users of all abilities have equal access. It's about removing and preventing those barriers that exist to keep us from the access, or preventing us access to the knowledge and the information that we need to live our lives in a meaningful way. Before I get started here, quick question. How many of you use an assistive technology? Anyone? I got a couple. So an assistive technology, is any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, modified, or customized, that's used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of individuals. Now, many people think that assistive technology is all about screen readers and alt tags, but actually that's not really true, right? Screen readers are just a small subset of the technologies that exist today. In fact, there's a very wide variety of assistive technologies, including these. Yes, it's true. Glasses and contacts, they're all assistive technologies that help a very large number of people across the globe today. It provides them access to the information that they need to lead their lives. But it's not just for blind people or for alt tags, right, or for screen readers. Accessibility is a broad concept, and it's about whether or not our users can use our software or not. So as we talk about accessibility, it's also important to recognize that there's more than just permanent disabilities that we're talking about. There's actually a range of temporary disabilities. People break their bones, they get cataracts, right? They have a range of life events. There's also situational disabilities, like a parent holding a baby in one arm while they're trying to do something else. And people also get distracted. They forget or they get stressed. And in fact, there are many disabilities that may not even be visible. Now, how many of you knew that I was, or could tell I was blind in one eye before I walked up here today? Probably not many unless you were on the UX team. But why should we really start building accessible solutions? Well, quite honestly, it's the right thing to do. It is 2018. We live in a digital world. We rely upon technology every day, young and old, to build things, to buy things, to apply for things, to solve problems. We are reliant upon technology, and without your help, there is a large group of people that may never get to do those things simply because they don't have access to the tools or the information that they need. But you can help. You can empower and enable this group to manage their own lives, right? Simply by including accessibility as everything that you do. Microsoft is a really great example of a company. They've built this great new adaptive controller for all of those wannabe gamers. It grants them access to play to their heart's content. Now, accessibility doesn't only help, those that need it. It actually helps all of us, right? So Wanda Diaz-Merced, she's a blind astronomer, and she went blind later on in life, and she was challenged with how does she do her life, or how does she do her work that she loves so much, and that was studying gamma rays. But at the time, all of the software that existed actually required astronomers to see the data. And she was really frustrated, and she worked with engineers to try to figure out how she could solve that problem. And they ended up translating all of that data that she would normally use into sound, and it was able to actually help her do her job again. But it was actually more than that. What they found was that it not only helped her, it actually helped the sighted users too. By combining the sound with the visuals, they found that the sighted users could actually better detect all those minute little differences in the data, right? So it shows that accessibility doesn't only help us, it can actually improve us. It can make us more efficient and effective at our jobs and in our lives. Adding accessibility is the foremost way to ensure that we bring out the best in everyone. Life also has a way of happening, right? So you can think about it as an investment into your future. After all, we're all getting older, and age is the largest group of people with disabilities, and we are all going to grow into it at some point in time. Cerner also has a policy of inclusion. We believe that the differences among us make us stronger as a whole. So why shouldn't we think the same thing for our users? Building accessible solutions, it ensures that our solutions can be used by as many users as possible. It meets our corporate beliefs, it makes us more marketable as a company, and it helps everyone. Cerner is also one of the largest medical technology companies in the world. We're in over 27,000 client sites in 35 different countries. That means that there is a Cerner EHR in about 20% of the countries across the globe. And many of those countries, they each have their own regulations surrounding accessibility. This is not something that we can opt out of. We are required to be accessible. And we're not only required, but our clients are also required to be accessible for their employees. They have to meet the American with Disabilities Act, right? So Cerner and our clients have to be accessible. And Cerner itself has to be accessible for many other reasons, right? In the European nations, we have to meet the EN 301549. It's the European standards for accessibility. Here in the United States, we also have Section 508, and it's legislation surrounding accessibility. And we also have the WCAG 2.1, level AA. That is the set of standards that we want to create, or we want to follow. But the good news is that out of all of these guidelines and legislation, we can actually just follow a set of 4 guiding principles to meet accessibility. Content must be perceivable. Interface elements in the content must be operable. Content and controls must be understandable. And content must be robust enough to work with current and future technologies. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, or POUR for short. These are the 4 guiding principles that we need to follow. And if we're able to follow these, we're able to actually create equally compelling user experiences for user abilities of all kinds, right? But who are we really targeting when we're looking to add accessibility? Excuse me. Well, we're not really focusing on one user, actually, right? We're trying to instead take a multifaceted approach to address a range of different user abilities. And by addressing the more challenged users, we can actually make our solutions better for everyone. Now, today I'm going to be discussing 4 different areas of focus: visual, auditory, motor skills, and cognitive. Now, there's more that we need to consider for sure, but I just don't have time to talk about them today. So as I mentioned before, we're not really designing for a disability, but rather we're trying to accommodate a range of user abilities. For vision, that means that we design from no correction to some correction to low vision and the blind. But what does that really look like? Well, we have a range of user conditions like macular degeneration, and it affects the central vision. And those users will actually use more of the peripheral vision to perform their normal tasks. Glaucoma users actually experience the opposite, and they lose their peripheral vision and only use the central vision. And people with diabetes can experience diabetic retinopathy, where the blood vessels in the eye leak, leading to dark patches, and this can make text blurry and really hard to read. We also have people with cataracts, and they experience areas of cloudy, hazy vision, and low contrast items become very hard to read and see. And we also need to accommodate for our users who are with low vision, where they use devices zoomed in or have assistive technologies like magnifiers to enlarge the text. And there's also a good percentage of users who are colorblind. And the most common would be in the seeing the color red, where reds and greens look very similar to each other, like this. And those that are blind, they may still have some sort of vision, just not enough to see. For these users, they'll actually use other devices like screen readers and other assistive technologies. And going back to those 4 guiding principles, the main concept for these users is perceivable because they have a hard time seeing the content. And for the low vision users, readability is the biggest key. The easiest way to help this user is to always ensure that we provide the highest optimal color contrast ratio between the text color and the background color. And as you can see here, colors and font size play a large role in how readable that text is. But the other thing that we can do is provide the user the controls to meet their own needs by setting the contrast ratio or the font size that helps them the best. And our blind users, they don't actually use the mouse, and instead they're going to use an assistive technology. And assistive technologies function much in the same way that a keyboard does. So we always want to ensure that our solutions work via the keyboard alone, using the tab, enter, and arrow keys. For auditory, we again have a range of user abilities that we need to accommodate for. And hearing aids are just one of those assistive technologies that this group would use. But the scary thing is that only 20% of the people who could actually benefit from hearing aids actually use them because of barriers like the extreme cost And there's cultural barriers, and there's also a little bit of a learning curve to them. And the main concept for auditory users is, again, perceivable because they have a hard time hearing the content. Motor skills are another area that we have to accommodate for. Some of these users may have temporary or situational disabilities, like broken bones or carpal tunnel. Others may have a disease or a congenital condition, like MS or arthritis. The more challenged users may have experienced a traumatic injury. They may have a missing or damaged limbs. And any of these users may have decreased or limited muscle control. They may experience tremors or have problems making precise movements. Going back to those four guidelines that we follow, operable is the key for them because they need to be able to operate the assistive technologies to use our solution. How many of you recognize this game? Anyone? It's whack-a-mole. That's right. So for our users with limited mobility, making precise movements can become very challenging, much like playing this game. How would you feel if every time you went to click on something, you missed it and you had to try it again? It becomes very tiresome and very frustrating very quickly, right? So when we design our interfaces, we want to ensure that we have a large enough click target that they can be easily clicked. And these users typically have problems using the mouse and instead will use the assistive technologies. And for them, we want to ensure that all interactive elements are accessible via the keyboard alone. And more importantly, we want to simplify the workflows because some assistive technologies are more difficult than others. Cognitive abilities is the last area that I'll talk about today. And it's the largest group, the largest population of disabilities, but yet the least represented in the best practices that we need to be following. And when we're talking about cognitive abilities, we're really talking in terms of functional, not clinical, right? So we're talking about memory and problem solving, attention, reading, and comprehension. And while most of their solutions are probably not suited for severe cognitive ability users, right? Other more consumer-facing solutions probably should be. But the thing you should understand about the cognitive abilities is that they are not an absolute. Cognitive abilities will ebb and flow throughout the day. We all experience some sort of cognitive challenges, especially when we're tired or stressed. All right, time for a quick little 180-second exercise. For this exercise, all you need is the 10-step set of instructions I'm going to give you on the next screen and the sheet of paper that I gave you before. Are you ready? Go. No pressure, but I actually have had somebody by this time have it solved and done. No pressure, though. Hey, we have one. Awesome. Anybody else? 2. Great job. 3, maybe. No? It's okay. 80 seconds. No pressure. We're just going to keep letting it play out because that's how it goes here. Sorry, guys. I'm sure you're all about there, right? "40 seconds. "20 seconds. All right. How'd that work out for you? Was it hard? All right. So that exercise illustrated many of the different things that we need to be accounting for as we're building our solutions. You had a set of instructions that may or may not have been easy or hard to follow, right? So you had to figure out what those instructions meant and execute them. I was also removing instructions, so maybe you were scared you weren't going to get it done on time, or you were stressed that, or confused that by converting the seconds into minutes to figure out how much time you had left. Or maybe it was just how I presented the information. I mean, I could have simplified it, right? We all process information just a little bit differently. I mean, some of us are really great with just text, and some of us are really great with just visuals, and there's more that are better with just visuals, or a mix of both, right? So maybe if it would have helped if I would have supplemented the instructions with the visuals, right? Would that have been easier? Maybe if I would have helped if I would have read you the instructions, or even if told you what you were making from the beginning, right? So comprehension, memory, problem solving, attention, we're all affected by these things at some point in time, especially when we're stressed or tired. And some of our users have problems with one or all of them. And additional stress, regardless of the cause, just adds to the challenges that our users have to make as they're making potentially life-saving choices every day, right? So to help with these cognitive challenges, we always want to use clear, simple, and concise text written for the appropriate user level. All right, next exercise. Any good readers out there? For this exercise, I want you to all read aloud the paragraph on the next screen. Ready? Go. What? Why can't you read that? Of course you can't read that. So it's a little frustrating, right? So thanks to Daniel Britton, a creative designer in London, we can all now better understand how a dyslexic reader may actually feel while trying to read. And he does this by removing about 40% of the letters, which is about how much longer it takes a dyslexic to actually read. Now, it's by no means what an actual dyslexic reader sees. It's just merely a tool for us non-dyslexic people to better understand the difficulties they actually face. But once you understand the pattern behind this font, you can actually read it. It just takes a lot more time and practice. So how do we help these users? Well, we want to simplify the content, and we want to use images and diagrams to support that content. And we give the users what they need, when they need it, in a clear, simple, and organized manner, so the user can focus on the task at hand. And by doing all of these things, we're not only helping those who are more challenged, we're actually helping all of our users. So that's great, but how do we really do it? Well, Cerner has to begin by including accessibility as a critical part of the solution building process. Now, as it stands, accessibility is more of an afterthought that we're running back to and fixing, right? Now, most of us want to be inclusive. We just lack the understanding of how to make that happen. But with contracts like the DoD and the VA, and with so many different countries, and the risk that it puts on our clients, we have to begin including accessibility right now. We have to stop being reactive and start building accessibility into the process. So building a solution is much like building a skyscraper. If you were to build that skyscraper without an elevator, I mean, you could still use the skyscraper. I mean, they could take the stairs. I mean, not many people are going to make it to the top. Might make it to the middle, maybe. But not everyone's going to be able to use it, right? So adding an elevator after you've built that skyscraper, it's going to require demolition and rehab and retrofitting. In the end, you're actually going to spend a lot more time and money than if you would have just planned for it in the beginning. So the same holds true for actually building solutions, right? We need to stop and rethink our current processes. We need to build smarter and avoid all of that retrofitting. We need to start the project off right by including accessibility at the very beginning in the initial project plan. And we can do that with a concept known as universal design. Universal design is the design and composition of buildings, products, and services so they can be accessed, understood, and used by all people. When you practice universal design, you can create an equally compelling user experience for a very wide range of users. This is Robson Square in Vancouver, Canada. Do you notice that zigzag pattern going through it? It's the wheelchair ramp. And it runs back and forth, zigzags all along, and it was built directly into the public space from the beginning. Now, this design is not perfect by any means. It does have some accessibility concerns to it, but it does go to show you a few different things. One, that accessibility is a journey and it's not a destination. We're never going to be 100% accessible, but we need to start where we're at today and work on it as much as we can, and we'll iterate it and make it better. And the second thing is that accessibility doesn't have to be ugly. It can actually be really beautiful. Universal design is a very inclusive approach to design. In our current process, it's actually very exclusive. We're trying to design for the average person, but in reality, we're all different. There is no average person, right? We are each unique, and we have our own sets of challenges and needs. So I want to encourage you not to think of accessibility as a single, flat, one-size-fits-all solution, but as a multifaceted, configurable space. So while accessibility guidelines give us the basics to meet accessibility, sometimes they can still fall short of some of our users' needs. But with that configurable space, it allows those users to set their own space to their own needs. And it all starts with project planning. So how do we plan for accessibility? First, we add about 10 to 15% more time to the project timeline. Now, this is only an estimate, as it may take more or less time depending upon your platform or how familiar you or your team may be with accessibility. And next, we want to research our users, the tools, and the frameworks. But as you're researching your users, do not assume what people with disabilities can and cannot do, because we need to understand their challenges so we can appropriately meet their needs. Do assume that you will have users with a very wide range of needs. There was a study in the British Journal of General Practice that found that 8% of male doctors were color vision deficient. So it just goes to show you that just because you can't see it, it doesn't mean that our users don't have some sort of disability. So it doesn't matter whether your solution is clerical, clinical, consumer, learning, or whatever. You will have users with broken bones, with arthritis, with dyslexia, or one of the other many different challenges that we need to be accounting for. And just for a quick level set, if you think that a blind physician is not going to be using our software, you're wrong, because we have 2 of them. So accessibility must be at the heart of everything we do. So as you evaluate those tools and the frameworks, if they don't meet accessibility requirements, you have to throw them out and find another solution. And once you've found your tools and you understand your users' challenges, how are you going to meet their needs? Identify the goals and make a plan. Next, appoint an accessibility steward to ensure that accessibility remains an important aspect to the project timeline. Now, they don't have to know everything about accessibility, but they need to be able to hold people accountable, because everyone is responsible. And once your team becomes familiar with that new accessibility process, all that extra time needed, it's going to disappear. So how do we incorporate accessibility into our content process? Well, we can create personas that reflect the different targeted user abilities. Personas are an easy way to outline the users, and each persona should describe a specific user and provide that user's behaviors, their goals, their challenges, and all of their needs. We want to share those personas with the entire team so everyone understands what those needs are and how to meet them, as well as how to test for them. We want to use those personas to create accessibility user stories that get worked just like any other requirement would. So whether you're starting a new project or just going back, building out a new enhanced workflow or updating an old component, we want to add accessibility acceptance criteria to the entire project. Now, it may be a journey, but accessibility can't be an afterthought and something to come back to and take care of later on. It must be a part of the everyday solution building process. Next, we want to use meaningful and well-written content. We want to keep it clear, simple, and concise, written for the appropriate user level. And users with assistive technologies, they need more context. So when we are creating our content, we want to always be specific and descriptive. For buttons, button labels should always communicate the action that they're going to perform when triggered. And links should never be a standalone link. Click here, learn more, details. A blind user hearing that from one of the assistive technology is not going to know what that link is, what it does, or what's going to happen. So we want to provide context. And we want the verbiage to describe what's going to happen or where the user is going to be taken when it's clicked. And with form fields, placeholder text just, it's not accessible. Assistive technologies don't read it. So without that label, a user may not know what that form field is or does or what to enter. Placeholder text also poses problems for users with memory or distraction issues. So always use a label and never just a placeholder. And when appropriate, provide instructional text because this helps everyone. Next, use captions to describe diagrams and tables. And data tables should always have column and row headers. And cells should always be appropriately associated to those, to the table content there. So the assistive technologies can really make sense of that for the end user. For our keyboard or other assistive technology users, we want to make sure that all interactive elements work via the keyboard alone. So because of this, we want to simplify the workflows as much as possible. And for these users, we also need to ensure that we provide proper navigation. We should be providing landmarks and extra links to allowing them quick, easy ways to navigate the content. Now over here on the left-hand side, you can see I've turned off the style sheets of this web page. And that skip to main content link, the keyboard user or a blind user using the assistive technologies would have to tab through every other link if they didn't have that skip to main content. Or they'd have to have every link read to them before getting to the main content. So the assistive technology users or a power user could actually skip to the main content link to go directly to the content. For our more challenged users using the assistive technologies, we need to provide alternate content. By default, images, icons, and text, audio, and video, they're just not accessible to everyone. So when we use them, we need to provide this alternate content to communicate what that content is. So you can think about it, if we were trying to describe an item over the phone to somebody who couldn't see it, how would you describe it to them? So when we use the images, we need to provide that extra detail because if we don't, it's just going to read the image name. And here, that would be cat-12345.jpeg. Now, that's not very helpful. It doesn't really tell the user what that is. What kind of cat is it? What's the cat doing? So here we've actually added the appropriate alt tag, and it would be known as cat, but that's not really that helpful either, right? So again, what kind of cat is it, and what's the cat doing? So we want to be specific and descriptive when we're providing that alternate content. Instead, it'd be far more helpful to have something like this, cat rolled up and a sheet of paper playing. It's far more descriptive, and it helps the user understand what that image is or does. And when we have a video, it may require an audio supplement. And in audio, it may require a transcript or closed captions. Next, how do we incorporate accessibility into our design process? Well, we don't want to overwhelm the users. We don't want to use long lines of text or big blocks of heavy content, because white space is important. We want to simplify the pages. We want to keep the lines short and provide that extra white space. And this reduces the user's mental load and allows them to focus on the important details and the task at hand. Now, there's a lot going on this screen, but that area inside of that red box, it's actually navigation. It's not apparent at all what it is or what it does. So do not create your own design pattern. Instead, stick to what people are familiar with. Use standard design patterns. And this helps all of our users by providing a consistent and predictable user experience across all of our solutions. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that our content is readable. And the best way to do that is to ensure that we have the highest optimal color contrast ratio between the text color and the background color. Now, this gray box here with the light text it's really hard to read, and in fact, it doesn't meet accessibility requirements. While the white box with the other text, it's darker, it's easier to read. Now, I don't have time to go through all the different details, but the WCAG does provide us guidance on what kind of the contrast ratios those should be. And it also does have some online tools to actually help you with that. But we also need to allow our users to customize their own workspace. Now, the New York Times is a really good example, and they provide a space to allow the users to actually customize their own font size. They can increase or decrease the font size to meet their own need. But there's still more that we really need to do to ensure that all users can perceive the content, right? We don't want to use color as the only way to convey that information, because not everybody is going to be able to see color the way we think they can. So here we can see a line chart with lots of different colors and the same square indicator. Now, while most of us are able to discern the difference between those different colors, our color deficient users won't be able to notice the difference, right? So some of those look very similar to each other, and because it has the same shape, they're not able to discern the difference. Now here, while the colors may be similar, the color deficient users can actually discern the different categories because we've used a different shape. And again, designing for the range of disabilities not only helps those who need it, it actually helps everyone else along the way too. And when we use animations, we want to use them appropriately and sparingly, because they can make our users sick. And when animations are used, they should be short and never flickering, and we should provide controls to disable them. So how do we incorporate accessibility into our coding process? Well, first and foremost, write semantic code. Semantic code is the gold standard for accessibility, and doing this will ensure that your solution is as accessible as possible. So over on the left-hand side, we can see some non-semantic code that's written with a lot of divs. It has a whole bunch of IDs and classes, and it could all be easily eliminated by just using semantic code, which we have on the right-hand side. Properly written semantic code will actually provide the inherent hierarchy of the data on the page. And assistive technologies use that data to actually present it to the end users using the assistive technologies. So use all of those HTML5 elements to provide page meaning and structure. Code order should also reflect the natural reading order of the content. And if you were to disable the CSS, the resulting view would be the code order, right? So assistive technology would read the code order, and we want the code to be read in a natural, logical reading order. But the main takeaway for the engineers in the room should be that the tag you use has a direct impact on the accessibility of your solution, because not all tags are created equal. Each tag has an implied meaning and a behavior. You can create a button tag with a a button tag, or a range of other tags. And they can be styled to look the same, but they're not, right? If you don't use the correct tag, a user may not be able to select a control or even take action on that control. The assistive technologies use the tags to determine how the user is going to interact with that tag. So does it get focus? Can it be selected? Or is it just a content container? So use the appropriate tag for the element needed and write semantic code. Now, when we develop controls that are custom and create these widgets with a combination of technologies, sometimes we do have to write non-semantic code, and that's okay. When we do, we can use YARA attributes. Now, YARA attributes is a specification that allows developers to add that accessibility information into the HTML tags. But word of warning, it is always best to use the appropriate HTML tag for the job needed, right? But when you can't, ARIA can be used to communicate the role, the state, and the property values of the elements. So applying the ARIA informs the browser and assistive technologies as how to treat and interact with those elements. But be careful, improper use can actually make your solution a lot less accessible. So how do we incorporate accessibility into our testing process? First, the test analyst should be testing for accessibility just like they're testing for everything else. And if something fails testing, it's logged and fixed, just like any other JIRA. But everyone on the team is responsible. And they should be testing as they go as well, because testing is everyone's responsibility. And while automated testing is great, it can't actually find all of the different problems that, in accessibility itself. So manual testing is the only way to find many of these accessibility issues. So try navigating and interacting in the solution only using the keyboard with the tab, enter, and arrow keys. If you can't, your solution is just not accessible. And you can also download a free screen reader or use the one that's built into your computer. VoiceOver's on the Mac, Narrator's on the PC. There's also NVDA, which is available free to download. But just be aware that assistive technologies work much like browsers do, and you can have one web page that's coded one way, and each of those different browsers is going to read it a little differently. Also, turn off the style sheets using the developer's tool extension. Does the page have meaningful structure without the CSS? Can you distinguish the main headers from the subheaders and the paragraphs? Semantic code should provide all that structure. Does it have a natural logical reading order to the content? If not, you should. So let's review. We know that accessibility isn't necessarily about designing for disabilities. Instead, accessibility is about providing access for a range of user abilities by removing and preventing many of the different barriers that exist, whether they're for permanent, temporary, or situational impairments. And we know that creating accessible solutions is the right thing to do. And it also happens to be an investment into our future. And we know that accessibility doesn't only help us, it can actually improve us. And it can bring out the best in everyone. We also know that we are required to be accessible. We have legislation that we have to meet. And they can be easily summed up by the 4 guiding principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, or POUR for short. And when we follow these guidelines, we can provide thoughtful, consistent user experiences that meet a wide range of user abilities. We also know that accessibility is a journey. It's not a destination. But we have to start where we are and stop retrofitting. We have the main categories of focus, and there's more that we can consider for sure. I've tried to provide several of those different examples to talk to how we can actually solve some of those problems. And by using a multifaceted approach to accessibility, we can focus on those range of user abilities. And by incorporating customization, we'll benefit all of our users, not just those that really need them. And we can do that through universal design. When we add accessibility into our process, we can build a more inclusive world. We know that we need to plan for accessibility from the start. Now, it may take more time in the beginning, but in the end, we're going to save time and money in the future. Accessibility has to be baked into every step of the process. And accessibility is everyone's responsibility. We each have a role to play. So the one thing that I learned on the way to get Thai food was that together we can empower our users to reach their goal. And given access, we can change people's lives. Now, it's going to take all of us, all of you, today. Thank you. Please check in and give me a rating. Let me know how I did. Thoughts, comments, I'm sure, certainly welcome.